If we think about the natural world for a second, what tends to be the cause of death for most wild animals? Maybe your first thought is predation. Maybe your mind immediately went to disease. Perhaps you considered starvation as well. Within the confines of our aquariums, we are able to limit what goes in and what goes out. Because of this, we can manually reduce predation to zero by creating shrimp-only tanks. With predation out of the way, what about disease? Well, if we keep our tanks fairly isolated and are careful about what we add to our tanks, we can mostly eliminate disease. I don't mean to suggest that our tanks can't possibly get disease, but for the most part, we can prevent it. That leaves us with the issue of starvation. Now, don't get me wrong, it's improbable that your adult shrimp are starving in your tank as long as you're feeding them at a reasonable interval and that they have some algae and biofilm to graze on. But just because your shrimp are surviving certainly doesn't mean they're thriving. If your shrimp are limping along with just enough nutrients to keep them alive, they very likely won't be producing any eggs. If they produce any eggs at all, you can expect a very small clutch size. If your shrimp have access to excess food, you can expect the opposite. Plenty of saddled and berried females with large clutch sizes. In turn, you can expect a population explosion to result. So how do we best achieve this outcome? Now, as we just discussed, there is certainly a possibility that we are underfeeding our shrimp tanks, especially if we aren't getting the level of breeding and population growth that we want. But this is a double-edged sword. We can certainly overfeed our tanks, and the results are arguably worse than if we underfeed them. Overfeeding a tank can lead to the entire colony dying off as a result. So we really want to be careful of that as well. Here's the steps I have taken to reach a level of sustainable feeding that yields tons of productive breeding and no excess ammonia. A really quick side note, you can feed your shrimp just about anything you want, but I'd highly recommend a staple food that has somewhere around 40% crude protein. Protein is vital in producing shrimp eggs and will result in faster growth and many more babies than if you fed a diet with limited access to protein. So to get started on determining how much we actually should be feeding, we need to slowly increase the amount over multiple weeks. As we do this, we should be doing regular water tests and observing how quickly our shrimp can eat what we've given them. If the shrimp haven't eaten their food within 3 hours, you've probably given them too much. If they eat it all within just a few minutes, it's likely too little. To make our lives easier, we should use measuring spoons for powdered food so we can document how much we're adding. For pellet foods, we can measure by the pellet, or using a food scale to be even more precise. Keep in mind that you'll need to increase your feeding as your colony grows. A tank that starts with 10 shrimp will need much more food once that tank has hundreds. After a few weeks or months of testing, you should find an amount of food that your shrimp will continue to eat until it's gone, but will not finish too quickly and find themselves left hungry. You can feed just about as much as you like if you are willing to do regular, large water changes. The recipe for breeding thousands and thousands of shrimp usually includes overfeeding, which is mitigated by weekly water changes. This should be done with caution and usually requires experience, but it is certainly effective at turning your tank into a shrimp factory. I personally aim to find a balance that keeps my shrimp full and happy, but does not require me to do weekly water changes. Like I said before, finding this amount will require some testing and patience on your end. Now seriously, don't rush this process. Do it as quickly as you feel comfortable, and make sure that this is even something you really want to do. If your goal is to have a small and healthy colony of shrimp, you don't need to worry too much about doing all this. If you're like me though, and want to create the largest and healthiest colonies possible, this is the route that I recommend. Just like in nature, food is a massively limiting factor, and a colony can only grow as large as the resources will allow. Like I said before, it's really important to have a staple food that is the bulk of your shrimp's diet. And as a reminder, I recommend this food having something in the ballpark of 40% crude protein. I personally feed a food called Shrimp Envy, but there are plenty of high-quality shrimp foods on the market. Some people even feed food that is primarily intended for fish, but your shrimp certainly won't discriminate. If it is edible and has a good protein content, your colony will do just fine. A sinking pellet is certainly best in my experience, and makes for the most enjoyable feeding time. I tend to drop it right by the glass, so the shrimp will all congregate there where I can easily see and film them. Despite having kept shrimp for years, I still stick around and watch every single time I feed. As I mentioned in a previous video, I like to use a coffee grinder to grind up fish flakes, sinking pellets, floating pellets, wafers, or just about any protein-rich food. The resulting powder is incredibly effective at raising baby shrimp. It is able to spread out all over the place and will coat just about every surface in the tank, which will ensure that each and every hungry baby will have access to proper nutrition. Another fantastic product for achieving a similar outcome is BacterAE. I have had fantastic luck with this product and would recommend it to just about anyone. I personally mix it up in tank water and spread the resulting mixture all throughout the tank. I will link a really good article about BacterAE in the description. It's written by Shrimply Explained and breaks down all the ingredients and explains why it is so beneficial. I'll also include an affiliate link to BacterAE if you'd like to get some. It supports the channel and your shrimp will really be grateful. A small container will also last you ages, as the necessary dose is really quite low. I want to share a personal anecdote with you that will hopefully illustrate exactly why heavy feeding is so important. The first shrimp tank I ever kept started off very slow. I had 10 healthy shrimp that seemed to do just fine, but there were never any babies. I assumed that the shrimp I had purchased were just too young to breed, so I left them alone and got distracted with other aspects of my life. A few months later, I became aware of just how much time had passed and was puzzled to find that my tank still had no increase in population size. I didn't see any saddles either, and was left wondering whether or not I even had any females in my tank. I did a little reading and found that sure enough, I had both males and females in my tank. I couldn't quite figure out why they weren't having any babies though. I had been so fearful of overfeeding my shrimp that I was accidentally giving them just barely enough to survive comfortably. Once I began to speculate that this was a limited resources issue, I increased my feeding slowly and kept a close eye on the tank. Instead of feeding twice a week, I fed every other day with smaller amounts. This single change resulted in a very different experience for me as a new shrimp keeper. In just a handful of days, I began to notice saddles developing on my female shrimp. Within a month or so, I even had a few buried females, which was by far the most exciting thing I had ever experienced in the aquarium hobby. The colony continued to do quite well with my new feeding regimen, but soon enough I found myself at another plateau. The population stalled at around 30 adult shrimp. I figured there were dozens of babies that I just couldn't see hiding somewhere in the moss. Again, I found myself distracted with life, and before I knew it, months had passed. When I refocused on my tank, I found that the population was still right around 30. This was the point that I had my final breakthrough. Slowly, I began to increase the feeding until I reached daily feeding, and monitored my tank very closely while doing so. I was feeding as much as I could possibly get away with while keeping a healthy ammonia-free tank. Over the next 6 weeks, I found myself with hundreds of babies, more buried females than I could count, and a healthy and active population overall. So instead of wasting months wondering what was going wrong like I did, please learn from my mistakes. Make these changes now so that you can reach your breeding goals. You might even have enough that you could sell off the excess to fund your hobby, or you could start other tanks with the colony that you already have. In closing, I'd just like to reiterate the point that our aquariums are a closed system. We can control everything that goes in and everything that we take out. Using this, we can create a very healthy, safe ecosystem with no predation and very limited risk of disease. With those two things out of the way, we can ensure that our shrimp have access to proper nutrition, protein, in quantities more than they could possibly want. By doing that, we have a very healthy, happy, breeding colony that continues to grow. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more informative shrimp videos in the future. Thanks again and happy shrimp keeping.